My dad took my $37,000 college fund while I was overseas to pay his debts. Now he thought I'd forgive him, but I made him regret it with one cold move. I should have seen it coming. Now that I'm writing this, I realize all the signs were there, but I guess when it's your dad, you give him way too much benefit of the doubt. I mean, who expects their parents to screw them over, right? But yeah, that's exactly what happened. The first major red flag was when I was 18, just about to head off to college. I busted my ass in high school, straight A's, tons of extracurriculars, scholarships, the whole deal. My dad, let's call him Greg, because let's face it, Dad doesn't feel right anymore, sat me down one evening and said, "Savannah, I've been thinking about your future. I think it's time we build your credit." I was like, okay, how? He smiled like he just cracked the Da Vinci Code and said, "Let's get you a car loan. I'll co-sign, and it'll be a win-win. You'll have a car for college, and your credit score will be solid by the time you graduate." Now, this would have been fine if I actually needed a car, but my school was in the city, and I'd already planned to rely on public transportation. Still, Greg kept pushing, saying stuff like, "Trust me, this is how successful people get ahead. You don't want to graduate with zero credit, do you?" I remember feeling a little weird about it, but I was only 18, and he was my dad. Plus, he sounded so confident, like he really believed he was doing something great for me. I almost went along with it until my mom, Lauren, got involved. Mom overheard one of our conversations and immediately shut it down. She said something like, "Savannah doesn't need a car loan. She needs to focus on her studies." Greg got defensive, mumbling about how women don't understand financial strategy, but Mom didn't back down. I didn't realize it at the time, but she probably saved me from getting saddled with a loan that would have been more for his benefit than mine. That wasn't the last time he tried to pull something shady, though. Over the years, there were smaller things, like how he'd asked to borrow money from me, any extra money I had, savings from my part-time jobs, even cash I'd gotten from relatives for graduation. He always had a reason: "I just need to tide me over," or "It's for the family." Don't you want to help the family? At the time, I got used to it, and he was my dad. Of course I'd help if he needed it. But the thing is, he never paid any of it back. And it wasn't just me he was doing this to. My mom later told me that he dipped into her savings more times than she could count. Fast forward a few years, and I'm 25. I've worked my ass off to build a life I'm proud of. By this point, I'm studying abroad in Sydney for my final semester, and I've got a plan: finish school, graduate debt-free thanks to scholarships and the savings I've been building since high school, and hopefully land a solid job. Everything was going great, and I was enjoying my life abroad until Greg called me. It was a random Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in my little flat, staring out the window at the street below. I answered the phone, expecting him to ask how my studies were going or something casual like that. Instead, the conversation went like this: "Hey, sweetheart," he said, his tone way too casual. "I wanted to let you know I've used the money in your college fund." I froze. At first, I thought I'd misheard. "What do you mean, used all of it?" He said, as if he were talking about finishing a bag of chips, "It's gone." My chest tightened, and I felt this weird buzzing in my ears. This wasn't just money. It was everything. $37,000 I'd saved through scholarships, part-time jobs, and carefully stashing away every little bit of birthday and holiday money I'd ever gotten. Money I worked for, planned for, and counted on to fund my senior year. "What do you mean it's gone?" I asked again, my voice cracking like I was choking on the words. He sighed, like I was the one inconveniencing him. "I had some debts to clear up. It's no big deal. You didn't need it anyway, right? You're almost done with school." I couldn't believe what I was hearing, the casual tone in his voice, the way he brushed it off like it wasn't a life-altering betrayal. It was classic Greg. He'd never really cared about education, at least not mine. One time, when I won a statewide academic competition, all he said was, "That's great, but don't forget looks matter more for a girl. No one hires brains, they hire presence." But I'd ignored him. I'd worked hard, gotten into college on scholarships, and proved that my education mattered, even if he didn't think so. And now here he was, telling me my hard-earned savings were just gone, like it wasn't a big deal. "How much is left?" I asked, forcing myself to stay calm even though my hands were shaking so hard I had to grip the edge of my desk. "None," he said confidently, as if it wasn't a big deal. "But you're smart. You'll figure something out." That's when it hit me: he didn't just steal my money, he didn't care about my future. To him, I wasn't a daughter to support or a person with dreams. I was just another resource to exploit. And then he had the audacity to add, "Don't tell your mom or Grandma Evelyn. They don't need to worry about this." The nerve of it, He wanted me to keep his secret to protect his reputation. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just said, "Good luck with that," and hung up. As soon as the call ended, my mind was racing with every insult, dismissal, and selfish act I'd ever endured from him. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about years of him acting like my efforts didn't matter. That night, I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and began making a list. First, documentation, bank statements showing the account's history, proof of my deposits, records of the scholarships I'd earned. If Greg thought he could just siphon away my future and walk off scot-free, he was about to find out how wrong he was. Then I opened up my online banking app and scrolled through months of transactions, and there it was, withdrawal after withdrawal, each one small enough to avoid raising any red flags, 500 here, 800 there, like he'd been trying to stay just under the radar. He'd wiped out $37,000 over the course of 5 months. I screenshotted everything and sat back in my chair, processing everything. 5 months, that meant he'd started this while I was still in Sydney, probably laughing to himself about how I was too far away to do anything about it. Greg's excuses were predictable, but this wasn't about debts. It was a pattern: borrowing money never repaid, failed business ventures, and shady schemes. When I was little, my birthday money often disappeared from the kitchen counter before I could deposit it. Greg always had an excuse: groceries, or I'll pay you back Friday, though Friday never came. Then there were his endless failed business ideas, pyramid schemes, bad investments, and reckless ventures, always propped up by borrowing money from me, Mom, or anyone gullible enough to trust him. It wasn't just the money, though. It was the lies, the manipulation. He had this way of making you feel like you were the problem for even questioning. If you called him out, he'd flip it back on you. "I'm doing this for us," he'd say, or "Why can't you just support me?" He always made me feel guilty for wanting something different. When I started talking about studying abroad, he told me it was a waste of time. "Why do you need to go overseas? We've got good schools right here." And when I insisted, he threw in a few digs about how I was running away from the family. What family? The family that never saw a dime of the birthday money they gave me? The family that had to pick up the pieces of his failures time and time again? The most painful memory was Greg pushing me into modeling at 15. "You're beautiful, Savannah," he'd say. Why waste it? He even made me miss school for sketchy casting calls. One turned out to be an amateur photographer who wanted me to pay for headshots. When I refused, Greg wasn't mad at the scammer, he was mad at me for ruining a great opportunity. From then on, I kept my head down and focused on school, every honor society I could join, extracurriculars that left me barely enough time to sleep. I was determined to prove to him and to myself that I could make it without his half-baked schemes. And I did. I got into a great university on a full scholarship and even managed to save enough from my part-time jobs to cover most of my living expenses. The rest went into the college fund, a fund I stupidly thought was safe because it had his name on it too. I clicked through my bank statements, pulling up screenshots of every withdrawal. The first one was $400, dated right before he'd called to ask how my classes were going. I remembered that call vividly because he sounded so proud of me. "You're going to do big things, kiddo," he'd said. I'd actually smiled, thinking for a second that maybe he believed in me. Meanwhile, he was probably laughing to himself about how easy it was to take what wasn't his. As the withdrawals piled up in front of me, I realized he didn't just steal money, he stole time. Every hour I'd spent tutoring high school kids, working late shifts at the coffee shop, or staying up until 3 a.m. filling out scholarship applications had been for nothing. And the worst part, I trusted him. Despite all the warning signs, I still thought he'd do the right thing when it came to my education. That trust was absolutely gone now. I scrolled through the texts he'd sent after the call. "Don't stress about the money," one said. "Maybe it's a sign you should take a break from school." A sign? I added those texts to my growing folder of evidence, screenshots of his casual dismissal of my hard work alongside the bank statements. Then I threw my phone onto my bed and took a deep breath, trying to calm the rage building inside me. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a complete disregard for everything I'd worked for. Another text popped up while I was sitting there staring at my laptop. "You know, modeling is still an option. I could make a few calls." I didn't respond. There wasn't a point. Greg didn't see me as a daughter, he saw me as a resource. But not anymore. The more I pieced everything together, the more questions I had. It wasn't just the fact that he drained my savings, it was the why. What kind of debts had he racked up that were so urgent he needed to steal $37,000? I knew Greg wasn't great with money, that was obvious to anyone who knew him, but this felt bigger than his usual antics. This wasn't borrowing $20 from my graduation money or putting gas on Mom's credit card without asking. This was calculated. He'd taken my money in chunks over months, knowing I wouldn't notice until it was too late. That night, I stared at my laptop, debating what to do next. I had the screenshots, the bank statements, and the timeline all laid out in front of me, but going to him directly wasn't an option. I was so deep in thought that I didn't hear my roommate, Paige, come in until she spoke. "Let me guess," she said. "It's your dad again." I winced. I hated being that person, the one whose dad was constantly screwing them over so much that my roommate could just assume. Paige walked in. "What did he do this time?" I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to say it out loud because it would make it even more real, but Paige was the kind of person who didn't back off until she got an answer. "He drained my college fund," I said finally. $37,000 gone. Her jaw dropped. "Are you serious? What the hell is wrong with him?" I tried to act like I wasn't completely unraveling inside. "He said he had debts." "Debts? What kind of debts?" "I don't know," I admitted. "He won't tell me, and honestly, I don't even care what they are. That money was mine. I worked for it, saved it, planned for it, and he just..." My voice broke. I stopped, taking a deep breath to steady myself. "Sav, that's not just messed up, that's criminal," she said. "It's not, though," I said bitterly. "His name was on the account, so technically he had every right to take it. Legally, he's covered. Morally, he's a piece of..." Paige didn't argue with that. "You're not letting this slide, though, right?" "No way," I said firmly. "I just don't know what to do yet." "That's the problem." Paige tilted her head, studying me. "Do you want me to help? I can start calling lawyers or something." I shook my head. "I think I've got it under control for now." "Thanks, though." She didn't move. Instead, she glanced at the papers again and frowned. "It's not just about the money, is it?" Her words hit harder than I expected because she was right. It wasn't just about the money. It was about everything. Every time Greg had dismissed my efforts, undermined my plans, or treated me like I was just another resource for him to exploit. "It's not," I admitted. Paige stood up and gave my shoulder a squeeze. "Well, if you change your mind and want backup, I'm here. And for what it's worth, you're way stronger than he'll ever be." Paige's comment stuck with me, stronger than he'll ever be. Maybe that was true, but I wasn't feeling very strong in that moment. All I could think about was how much I hated being defined by his failures. I didn't want to be the girl with the shitty dad or the roommate who was always cleaning up after her parents' latest disaster. I needed to fix this, not just for the money, but for me. I couldn't let him keep dragging me down. That's when I realized I couldn't do this alone. I needed someone who could see this for what it was, someone who could back me up. That's when I called Grandma Evelyn. Evelyn's been the backbone of the family for as long as I can remember. She doesn't take crap from anyone, least of all Greg. He's always been a little afraid of her because her words carry weight. When Evelyn speaks, people listen, and Greg knows she sees through all his excuses and half-truths. She's called him out more times than I can count, and unlike the rest of us, he never talks back to her. It's like he knows she's the one person he can't manipulate, and that makes him nervous. She's the only one who has always been there for me in ways my dad never was, helping with school projects, teaching me how to budget, even slipping me extra cash for textbooks when Greg conveniently forgot. When she picked up, I launched straight into it. "Grandma, I need to tell you something about Dad." There was a pause on the other end, and then she said, "What did he do now?" I spilled everything. The call, the missing money, the withdrawals. I even sent her screenshots of the texts. Evelyn didn't say much while I talked, but I could hear her sharp inhale when I mentioned the total amount. $37,000, she said, her voice low and steady. "And he didn't think to ask your permission?" "No," I replied. "He just said he had debts. I don't even know what kind." "That man," she muttered. "He's always been reckless, but this is a new low." Reckless was an understatement. Greg's financial track record was like a collection of bad decisions on steroids. There was the time he tried to sell homemade candles, only to burn half the kitchen, or the investment in collectible coins that turned out to be plastic. "We need to get to the bottom of this. I'll make some calls." "Don't tell Mom yet," I said quickly. I wasn't ready for that conversation. "Fine," she said, "but you can bet your ass I'm calling a family meeting." And she did. The next day, Evelyn called a family meeting and insisted I join on video call. She'd rounded up everyone, Aunt Diane, my cousins, and even Uncle Mark, who always found a way to defend Greg no matter what he did. As soon as the call started, Evelyn didn't waste a second. "Greg has stolen $37,000 from Savannah's college fund," she announced, "and I want to know what he's done with it. Does any of you know what he's been up to?" Aunt Diane, who's a lawyer and the kind of person who doesn't tolerate any nonsense, immediately sat up straight. "He what?" she asked sharply. "Mark, predictably, jumped in, looking uncomfortable. Now, Evelyn, let's not jump to conclusions. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation for this. An explanation? Diane snapped. How do you explain taking that much money from your own daughter? That's not just wrong, it's illegal. Mark shrugged, clearly trying to downplay the situation. Maybe he needed it. Savannah's almost done with school anyway. She doesn't need all of it. I couldn't hold back anymore. Are you serious? I said, leaning closer to the screen. That money wasn't his to take. It wasn't about need. It was my money for my future. Look, I'm not saying it's right, Mark replied, trying to calm the situation, but Greg's your father. Family forgives. Family doesn't steal, Evelyn snapped. Diane, still bristling, asked, Savannah, did he give you any reason for this? Anything at all that could explain where the money went? I shook my head. All he said was that he had debts. That's it. He won't give me any details. Debts. Diane's tone shifted into lawyer mode, calm, measured, but with an edge. What kind of debts are we talking about? That's what I'm trying to figure out, I replied. The room went silent for a moment. I could see Diane biting her lip through the screen, deep in thought, while Mason, my cousin, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Greg had always been secretive about his finances, but this wasn't just secrecy, this was something bigger. I'll bet it's gambling, Diane said finally, breaking the tension. Remember when he borrowed money from Mom last year? He said it was for car repairs, but then we found out he'd been going to that casino upstate. And what about those business loans he kept talking about? Mason chimed in. He said he was starting a landscaping company, but all he did was buy a bunch of used lawnmowers that broke down in a week. Mark looked clearly frustrated. Come on now. Greg's not perfect, but he wouldn't do something like this without a good reason. Are you kidding me? Diane fired back. Greg's been taking advantage of people for years. This isn't new. And if there's proof of those withdrawals, he's crossed a serious line. The argument spiraled from there, voices overlapping as everyone dug up old grudges and instances of Greg's recklessness. Sitting there on the video call, I felt this sinking weight in my chest. Evelyn was right, this wasn't just about the money. This was about years of bad decisions and everyone else cleaning up his mess. Finally, Evelyn raised her hand. Enough, she said firmly. We can sit here all day pointing fingers, or we can figure out what to do next. Savannah, do you have proof of what he did? I nodded, holding up the folder I'd put together with all the screenshots, bank statements, and text messages. Evelyn's face hardened as she flipped through the pages. Diane leaned in, skimming through the documents with an expert eye. This is enough to confront him, Diane said. He has no defense for this. Mark groaned. Do we really have to make this public? Can't we handle this quietly? No, Evelyn said. This stops here. Greg needs to be held accountable. For the first time, I saw Mark look genuinely uneasy. He muttered something about family loyalty but didn't argue further. As the meeting wrapped up, Diane turned to Evelyn. We need to prepare for his excuses. You know he's going to come back with every manipulative trick he has. Savannah, don't let him guilt you. You have every right to stand your ground. Evelyn nodded and turned to me through the camera. We're going to figure this out, she said, but be ready. Greg won't make this easy. I nodded. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about making sure he couldn't keep doing this to anyone else. My grandma didn't waste time. By the next morning, she'd called my mom, Angela, and told her everything. I wasn't thrilled about it. I didn't want Mom dragged into this mess, but Grandma said she had to know. She wasn't wrong, but that didn't make it any easier. When I called Mom that evening, I could tell she'd been crying. Her voice was soft, tired. Savannah, she said quietly, your grandmother told me everything. I hesitated. Are you okay? No, she admitted, but I'm done pretending. I've been done for a while, but now I have no choice. I'm filing for divorce. I was honestly shocked. Hearing her say it out loud made my stomach twist. I'd known things between my parents weren't great, Greg's antics had been wearing her down for years, but divorce? That was a new level. What finally pushed you over the edge? I asked, even though I already had a good guess. It's not just the money, she said, confirming my thoughts. It's everything. The lies, the gambling, the loans I didn't even know about. Did you know he tried to remortgage the house without telling me? He's been hiding things for years, Savannah. Years. She paused. And when I asked about your college fund, do you know what he told me? He said you were taking a break from school and didn't need it. He called it borrowing. He actually said that, she sighed. Yes, and I believed him, at least for a moment. But I can't anymore. He's not just reckless, Savannah. He's selfish, and I'm done letting him drag us down. For a second, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to comfort her, tell her it would be okay, but another part of me was still processing the fact that Greg had lied so easily, like my future was just a convenient excuse. Then, as if he hadn't done enough, Greg had the audacity to send me a text the next day while I was in class. "Hey princess, quick question. You wouldn't happen to have any other savings accounts, would you? Just wondering since you're always so good with money." I stared at my phone, the casual entitlement in his words making my blood boil. He didn't even try to hide his intentions. Still, I forced myself to reply with a neutral tone. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, no reason," he wrote back almost immediately. "Just thinking about your future." I wanted to scream, but instead, I got to work. I closed any remaining accounts he might know about, transferring everything to a bank he didn't have access to. Greg wasn't going to get another penny from me. In the days that followed, Aunt Diane took charge. As a lawyer, she knew how to dig deep. She didn't hold back. I spent hours on video calls with her and Grandma, piecing together every detail of Greg's mess. What we found was worse than I'd imagined. He hadn't just used my college fund for gambling debts, though that was a big chunk of it. He'd also funneled money into sketchy, borderline illegal activities. One involved a pyramid scheme he bought into, promising guaranteed returns by recruiting others. When it collapsed, Greg was left owing thousands to people he'd convinced to join, including a family friend who trusted him. "Do you even want to know how much he owes in total?" Diane asked during one call. I hesitated, then shook my head. "No, I don't think I can handle it." "Fair enough. Just know this, we've got everything we need to hold him accountable, even if he's a co-signer on that account." That was the thing about Diane, she didn't sugarcoat anything, but you could tell she genuinely cared. A few days later, I decided to fly home. I couldn't handle this from across the ocean. I needed to face it head on and be beside my mom to comfort her. The confrontation happened faster than I'd prepared for. Greg barged into the house while I was in the kitchen with Mom and Diane. "So this is how it is now?" he sneered. "Plotting against me? Turning my own family against me like I'm some villain?" I stood, my voice sharp. "No one turned us against you, Dad. You did that when you stole my college fund." His expression hardened, and his tone turned venomous. "Shut up. I didn't steal anything. I borrowed it. And let's not act like you're suffering. You're in Sydney, living it up, while I'm handling real problems here." "Real problems?" I shot back. "Your gambling debts? Your shady scams? None of that had anything to do with me. You had no right to touch that money." He scoffed. "Oh, get over yourself. Family helps family. That's how this works. Family doesn't steal," Mom cut in. Greg snapped his head toward her. "Don't act like you're so innocent, Angela. You've been leeching off me for years." Mom didn't flinch. "You took from your daughter, Greg. Don't you dare twist this into something it's not." He turned back to me, his tone shifting into false pity. "You've always been so ungrateful, Savannah. Everything I've done for you, and this is how you repay me?" That was it. "You've done nothing for me," I said. "I lost it. You're not my father. A father doesn't destroy his child's future for his own messes. I don't want to see your face again." The room went silent. Greg's face twisted in fury, but before he could lash out again, Diane stood up, holding a folder. "Greg," she said coolly, "we have everything, bank statements, receipts, text messages. If you want to keep digging this hole, be my guest, but I promise you won't win." He gave a bitter laugh, muttered, "You will regret this. Screw all of you," and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The divorce papers were filed the next day. Mom wasn't just walking away, she was making sure Greg paid for what he'd done. Diane worked closely with her, gathering evidence and presenting everything in court. Greg tried to fight it, of course. He claimed he was misunderstood, that he'd always planned to pay me back, but when the judge asked how, he had no answer. "You haven't held a steady job in 3 years, the judge said, flipping through the documents, "and yet you drained your daughter's college fund for what? Gambling and failed business ventures?" Greg stammered, but the judge wasn't interested. By the end of the hearing, he was ordered to repay every cent he'd taken, with interest. It wouldn't happen overnight, but it was something. Things started to unravel for him fast. It wasn't just the legal pressure, it was everything, the burned bridges and the lies catching up to him. He'd leaned so heavily on manipulation and borrowing from family that when those doors shut, he had nowhere left to turn. Mom got the house, and Greg was left with nothing but his debts and the fallout of his actions. Back in Sydney, I tried to get back to my normal routine, but it wasn't easy. The weight of everything that had happened hung over me like a storm cloud. But my university stepped in to help, offering me additional financial aid when they heard about my situation. I also picked up a part-time job at a local bookstore, squeezing in shifts between classes. I started to feel like I was regaining control of my life. The payments to me started coming a few months after the ruling. They were small at first, but they came. Diane made sure the terms were airtight, direct withdrawals from his paycheck, no excuses. The only reason he even had a paycheck was because he'd been forced to get a job. Apparently, no one in the gambling world wanted anything to do with him anymore. Word got around that Greg couldn't pay his debts, and it seemed even his poker buddies weren't willing to take the risk. The charm he used to rely on wasn't enough to bail him out this time. From what Grandma told me, he was working a low-paying office job he hated, just barely scraping by while trying to keep up with his repayments and other debts. But one afternoon, I got a message from Mark. Seeing his name pop up on my phone made me roll my eyes. Mark, Greg's biggest defender throughout the whole ordeal. Still, I opened it. "Hey Savannah, just wanted to let you know your dad's been talking about how sorry he is for everything. He says he's changed. He's really struggling, and he thinks it would mean a lot if you'd consider letting him off the hook for the rest of the repayments." I stared at the message. Let him off the hook? After everything he'd done? I typed out a quick reply. "Hey Mark, I'm glad to hear he's sorry, but the repayments stay. He's paying back what he took from me, not doing me a favor. Actions have consequences." Mark didn't reply, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to let Greg guilt me into giving him yet another free pass. Months passed, and I threw myself into work. It wasn't easy. Juggling a part-time job and financial aid wasn't exactly the college dream, but I made it work. Finally, after everything, I graduated with a degree I'd worked so hard for, a degree Greg had tried to derail. The ceremony was back home, and while I was excited to celebrate, I couldn't shake the anxiety bubbling beneath the surface. Greg had been unusually quiet in the months leading up to it, no texts, no surprise guilt trips, but the thought of him showing up unannounced lingered in the back of my mind. I knew how much he loved playing the victim, and a big event like this felt like the perfect stage for him to try and insert himself. My fears were confirmed when he showed up unannounced. I spotted him as I was lining up with my classmates, his loud voice cutting through the crowd. "That's my girl," he shouted, grinning like he was the proudest dad in the world. "She gets her brains from me, you know." My face burned with embarrassment. People were staring, whispering. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, but before I could say anything, Aunt Diane, always ready for a fight, stepped in. "What are you doing here, Greg?" She stepped in front of him. "I'm here to celebrate my daughter," he said, still grinning like he'd done nothing wrong. Diane strictly said, "You're not welcome here. Leave, or I'll have security escort you out." Greg's smile faltered, but he didn't argue. Instead, he muttered something under his breath and walked off, disappearing into the parking lot. Diane stayed with me until the ceremony started, making sure he didn't come back. After the ceremony, my family gathered to celebrate. Grandma hugged me tightly, her eyes filled with tears. "You did it, Savannah," she said, "and you did it your way." Mom, smiling for the first time in what felt like ages, handed me a small gift. This is just the beginning. Looking around at the people who truly supported me, I realized that my dad's presence wasn't just unnecessary, it was unwelcome. My success didn't belong to him, and he didn't get to play the role of the proud father when all he'd done was try to take me down.